So it's week 5 of the class, and let me go over what I have learned or been emphasized to me. First and foremost, weighted cost of capital, financing considerations, and the impact on energy projects. I already knew that was a thing. It's pretty close to being the thing. See my discussions of wind power previously. And let me also predicate that this class that I'm working on and using the TerraPower Natrium Reactor, I don't know the answer yet. Right? You're on this journey with me. I see a couple different scenarios coming out, and one may say, yeah, we really should support this sort of technology. The other, not so much. So, lesson number one has to do with the fact that any solution, even if I think it's going to be a good answer, is going to require a lot of money, and that has so much to do with financing costs. And since there is no current real system for what carbon costs in the long term, the discount rate or how much the value of spending money today is versus the future is really going to drive the project. There are other videos out there that go into great lengths about this, but it's going to be a tough road to hoe for just making it solely on the merits of what it costs to build the plant versus the electricity it produces when you compare it to natural gas, solar, and land based wind, not offshore wind. So that's takeaway number one. The second factor that I've definitely learned about is that while at a top level, and what you hear in the news is very summary data, that the industry, specifically the energy industry, is a very well honed machine in terms of running calculations, determining the value of capital, understanding when they're going to make money and when they don't. Um, it's both a very well tuned machine and it's a very complicated machine. And I had discussed in videos a couple years ago about infrastructure. But if you are someone who's interested in green power, you cannot brush aside the question of how you're going to get that power to where it needs to be. That is probably as big an issue as the actual power generation source going forward for this country. So that's a biggie, and how that's paid for is yet a subject that maybe I'll make a video some other day. Suffice to say that no one wants to include that cost in their project. So when I'm looking specifically at this place, Humboldt Bay in Northern California, which is very dependent on the grid, and it's a weak grid where they are, it's really a situation where are they going to pay for a better grid so that they can get renewable energy from Southern California, which is not going to be cheap? Or do they want to consider having a local power generation source, which will greatly reduce the need not just for carbon generating emissions, but reduce the need for significant infrastructure projects? And these infrastructure projects, besides being expensive, as a person who cares a lot about the environment, um, they take up space. They go through land, and people don't want that. You don't particularly want to dredge a power line up a river in Portland or cut down trees and create a right of way through a national park. That's not what myself, as a person who considers himself something of a conservationist, wants to do either. So I believe this is to some degree reinforcing my thought that you need to have a mix between renewable and steady state sources because, like it or not, massive infrastructure projects to bring wind power from the Midwest to the East Coast or north south is not going to happen. It's just not on the menu. So that's my thought there. The last project specific problem I've run into is that while I've been looking at the financial elements to it and I've been looking at the technological, there is of course, a component to this that has to do with how people feel. And nuclear power, I would say, is somewhat analogous to airplanes versus cars. At some level that it's more dangerous for you to be driving downtown. I mean, I know what my drive downtown is like on a daily basis, but you may have a fear of flying, and that fear may drive you to avoid flying and take a bigger chance. I use that analogy because, in the case, for instance, of people who are advocates in the Green Party, and I'm seriously thinking about the Green Party, it's difficult when listening to some of the discussions by people who consider themselves green to say, okay, you have a choice to make, and if dredging a high voltage line under the Columbia in Oregon, for example, is not something you want to do, and I would agree with that. I would support that position strongly. Unless you're going to tell folks they can't have electricity, and I think that's just unrealistic, you're going to have to come up with solutions that require less destruction of land. And so, in the subject of nuclear, I think a really core benefit to it, and something that doesn't get discussed enough, is that you're using a lot less land. It's a lot more energy dense. It's, in fact, the most energy dense, even than carbon fuels. And that has a significant environmental benefit that I don't think is discussed as much. A natrium power plant would take is an order of magnitude lower in terms of land consumption than equivalent solar, for example. And that doesn't mean you don't do solar, but it means you probably can't do solar everywhere because you don't have that much land to be set aside for that type of renewable. And to a lesser degree, this applies to wind. That message, if you're still listening to this video at this point, I need to understand both to the people who don't like it and to the people who do like the idea of nuclear power, how that gets put out there, how it is, what would you need to hear to make that a more important piece of your discussion. So that's my takeaway so far. I have kind of ended the going over the specifics of what I've done in a particular lesson because then I'm getting feedback from the teacher, and I've decided a little more summary level, both for you and me, is a better choice. So if you have comments, please let me know. Take care.